So I recently got a FlashForge Guider 2, and during setup I encountered several issues. Because there isn't a lot of videos or documentation online, I thought I'd make a video so that if anyone encounters the same issues, they might be able to solve the problem. So the first thing that I encountered was during setup. The user's guide tells you to level the build plate, and it asks you to start that by turning the screws under the build plate all the way counterclockwise, looking from the top, and that should move the build plate all the way down. What I was finding is that during the leveling process, it was telling me the plate was too close and would ask me to move the plate down farther, but it's not possible with the screws tightened all the way. And so what I found was that little L bracket in the back triggers an optical sensor for the homing of the build plate, and it was not mounted in the right spot, or it's maybe too small. I'm not sure so what I did was I made a shim. It's about 4 millimeters, so it moves the L bracket up 4 millimeters, and after that the build plate would rise up to the top and be about 4 millimeters lower than it was previously, and that allowed me to complete the leveling process from that option there. My next suggestion would be to actually do a extruder calibration first before you do the auto leveling. So go to extruder calibration here, click on that. It's going to put the nozzle in the middle of the build plate, and then use a piece of paper and move the build plate using the on-screen options until the piece of paper is just barely dragging. You can kind of feel some resistance with the paper, and then I actually put the build plate one increment down, like I think it's 0.1 farther away from the extruder at that point. Then do the auto leveling, and I recommend doing the leveling with the build plate heated, so that you can get something accurate. The next issue that I had was just kind of personal preference, but I don't like the build tack surface. I like to print with brims, and the brims are basically impossible to get off the build tack surface unless you get the calibration right perfectly. It's too finicky for me, so I took that off, cleaned the plate with some alcohol, and then put on this generic Kapton tape. It's 10 by 10. I'm gonna see if I can find a 10 by 12 on Amazon. I got this from Micro Center. And printing on Kapton tape with the ABS presets in Simplify 3D went perfectly the first time, and I haven't had any failures since, doing I think a 4 millimeter brim that's touching the printed object. So that all worked out really well. The next thing that I encountered was just trying to do the firmware update. You're not going to be able to use the Wi-Fi until you get a firmware update, and the issue that I had was you should be able to update the firmware by going to Tools, and then there's a firmware update option here. I don't know if they moved it. This is the newest version, 4.0. I couldn't find it anywhere, so I just installed the older version of the software and did the firmware update in the older version of the software. Don't firmware update over Wi-Fi ever. It's too spotty and you might brick your board. So just update over USB. Just do an actual USB connection to the printer. And lastly, definitely get Simplify 3D.